I stood there, heart pounding, in front of the entire boardroom, every executive, every department head, and the so-called new face of innovation, Marissa Lee, smiling with my stolen project on the screen behind her. Lucas Bennett, my boss, my mentor, the man I'd once admired, didn't even look at me when he slid the termination letter across the table. Thank you for your service, Samantha. You're no longer needed on Project Equinox. Marissa will be leading from here. Also, HR will handle your offboarding. This is effective immediately. I heard Lisa Carter gasp in the back corner of the room. She wasn't the only one. I felt the weight of every pair of eyes waiting for my breakdown. But I didn't break. Instead, I reached calmly into my bag and pulled out a thick, tabbed folder, stamped and sealed from the U.S. Patent Office. I placed it gently on the table and pushed it across to the board's legal counsel. I believe this is relevant, I said, my voice firm but steady. It's the original contract for Project Equinox, filed 6 months ago, under my name. And these, I continued, opening a USB drive and placing it down, are the original source files, timestamps, commit logs, and access credentials, all recorded under my personal cloud account. Everything you just watched her present is mine. Lucas turned ghost white, and when the chairman looked up and asked, "Is this legitimate?" the counsel replied without hesitation, "Everything matches the records. This project is legally hers." Silence. Until someone finally whispered the words I'd waited months to hear. She owns everything. 4 years earlier, I walked into Solvista Tech for the first time, clutching my portfolio and a coffee that had gone cold during my nervous wait in the lobby. Denver's winter sun streamed through the windows of what was then just a small office with mismatched furniture and the unmistakable energy of a startup ready to change the world. Samantha Blake, a tall man with intelligent eyes and an easy smile, approached, hand extended. Lucas Bennett, welcome to the chaos. The office housed just 12 people back then. We worked elbow to elbow at desks pushed together, sharing ideas over cheap pizza and coding until our eyes burned. There was an authenticity to those early days, a shared mission that made every late night feel worthwhile. We didn't hire you to smile or take notes, Lucas had told me on my first day. We hired you because your mind works differently. We need that. And he meant it. Within my first year, I'd redesigned our entire security protocol. By the second, I was lead technical architect. The quiet, thoughtful woman who'd always been told she was too serious in past roles had finally found a place where intensity was valued, not smoothed over. Project Equinox was born on a Tuesday, after 3 consecutive breaches had hit major tech companies. I remember sketching the initial concept on a napkin, while the rest of the team argued about whether it was even possible, a self-adaptive AI platform that could detect and neutralize cyber attacks before they happened. Not just responding to known patterns, but predicting the unknown. It would need to think like a criminal, someone said. No, I corrected quietly. It would need to think beyond the criminal. See what they don't even know they're showing us. Lucas leaned forward then, eyes locked on mine. Can you build it? I nodded once. I can, but it'll take time. For 18 months, Equinox became my obsession. I coded through weekends, holidays, even through a mild case of pneumonia. The algorithm was complex, beautiful in its elegance, but required constant refinement. I built the foundation piece by meticulous piece, testing and retesting until it began to recognize patterns even I hadn't explicitly programmed. As Solvista grew, so did my project. We moved to larger offices, the team expanded, investors started paying attention. Lucas still made time for our AA brainstorming sessions, though. His business acumen paired with my technical vision had become the company's heartbeat. We're going to change everything, he'd say, gesturing at my screens of code. You're building the future, Sam. I believed him. I believed in us. This unlikely partnership between the charismatic CEO who could charm any investor and the architect who could build what others only dreamed of. I never saw myself as the face of Solvista, but I knew I was its brain. And that felt like enough. The first warning sign came so subtly I almost missed it. A company-wide email introducing Marissa Lee as our new Chief Strategy Officer. Harvard MBA. Former consultant at McKinsey. Sleek professional headshot showing a woman with a perfect smile and calculating eyes. She'll help us position Equinox for market, Lucas explained when I questioned the need for the role. You focus on perfecting the tech. She'll handle the narrative. I welcomed her with professional courtesy when we met. She complimented my work, asked intelligent questions, took careful notes. Her handshake was firm, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "I've heard so much about you," she said. "The genius behind the curtain." Something in her tone made me uneasy, but I dismissed it as my natural introversion. My discomfort with new people had always been my weakness. So when she started showing up at my technical meetings uninvited, I told myself she was just being thorough. When she began reframing my technical explanations and pitches, I convinced myself she was just translating for non-technical stakeholders. But then came the investor deck. I found it by accident, left open on the conference room screen after a meeting I hadn't been invited to. Slides detailing Equinox, my creation, my code, my vision, but my name was nowhere to be found. Instead, under project leadership, there was a single name, Marissa Lee. I stared at it for a long moment, that familiar coldness spreading through my chest, the same feeling I'd had in previous jobs when my ideas were attributed to louder, more confident colleagues, the feeling of being erased. That night, I stayed late, long after everyone had gone. I pulled up the company's original contracts, the project charters, the documentation of every line of code and every breakthrough, and I began to make copies, not because I planned to do anything with them, not yet, but because something deep inside told me I needed to protect myself. As I gathered the evidence of my own work, I remembered something my grandmother had told me when I was young. In this world, brilliant women aren't just forgotten, Samantha, they're deliberately erased. Don't let them erase you. I wouldn't. Not this time. The changes were almost imperceptible at first, like water slowly carving away stone. Lucas began scheduling meetings without me. My access to certain servers was accidentally restricted. My emails about critical project decisions went unanswered for days. "We need to streamline communication," Marissa explained when I confronted her about being excluded from a key strategy session. "Too many cooks, you know. Lucas thinks it's better if I handle the high-level discussions and filter down the relevant technical requirements to you." The word stung. Filter. As if my role was now to receive instructions rather than drive innovation. "Equinox is my project," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I designed it. I built it. I should be in those discussions." She tilted her head, her smile gentle but her eyes cold. "Of course it's your project, technically speaking. But Solvista needs to consider the bigger picture now. Investors respond better to certain presentations." The implication hung in the air between us. Later that week, I requested a private meeting with Lucas. We met in his new corner office with its panoramic view of the mountains, a far cry from the cramped space where we'd once shared takeout during late-night coding sessions. "I'm concerned about the direction we're taking with Equinox," I began, "and about my role. I feel like I'm being sidelined." Lucas leaned back in his chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Sam, you're brilliant. You know that. But this company is evolving. We're not just a bunch of coders anymore. We need people who can speak the language of business, who understand optics." "You mean people like Marissa?" He sighed. "You're better behind the curtain. Your mind works in ways that most people can't understand. That's your gift. But leadership, public-facing leadership, requires different skills." I felt the blood rush to my face. "So I built the empire. But you want someone prettier to rule it." His laugh was dismissive. "Don't be dramatic. This isn't personal. It's business." But it was personal. It had become personal the moment they decided to erase me from my own creation. That night, I made 3 decisions that would change everything. First, I contacted a patent attorney who specialized in software and intellectual property rights. Second, I registered a technical consulting company under my name. And third, I began creating an irrefutable digital paper trail documenting every aspect of my work on Equinox. I didn't tell anyone, not even Lisa Carter, the only other developer who'd been with Solvista since the early days and the closest thing I had to a friend there. This was something I needed to do alone, quietly and methodically. Over the next 2 months, the erasure accelerated. My name disappeared from official documentation. My suggestions were ignored, then later presented as Marissa's insights. In meetings, Lucas would defer to her opinion over mine, even on technical matters where her knowledge was clearly superficial. The final humiliation came during a demonstration for our biggest potential client yet, a government defense contractor. I'd spent weeks preparing, ensuring that every aspect of Equinox performed flawlessly. But when the day arrived, Lucas pulled me aside just before the meeting. "We're going to have Marissa lead this one," he said casually. You'll be there for technical backup if needed. I stood frozen, struggling to maintain my composure. Lucas, I know this system better than anyone. I built it. And that's why you'll be there, in case there are questions she can't answer. But Marissa has rapport with these people. They speak the same language. The meeting was excruciating. I sat silently while Marissa presented my work as if it were her own. She fumbled through technical explanations, glossing over the very innovations that made Equinox revolutionary. When questions came, she'd glance at me, expecting me to whisper the answers so she could relay them as her own. The client seemed impressed nonetheless, more by the concept than the execution. As we wrapped up, he shook Marissa's hand warmly. Brilliant work. You've built something remarkable here. She smiled, not even glancing my way. Thank you. It's been my passion project. I felt something break inside me then. Not my heart, but something harder and more essential. My trust, my loyalty, my willingness to remain silent. That evening, as the office emptied, I received an email from the patent office confirming my application was proceeding. 6 weeks later, as Marissa took more control and I was given fewer responsibilities, the official documents arrived. I stored them securely, away from the office, and waited. Because timing, I was learning, was everything. The boardroom ambush came on AI Thursday morning in late September. The email invitation had arrived the night before, an all-hands executive meeting to discuss the future direction of Project Equinox. My name was on the recipient list, almost as an afterthought. Denver's autumn light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows as I took my seat near the back of the room. The energy was strange, tense, expectant. A few colleagues avoided my gaze entirely. Others shot me quick, sympathetic glances. Lisa slid into the chair beside me, her expression worried. "Do you know what this is about?" she whispered. I nodded slightly. "I think I do." Lucas entered with Marissa close behind him, both immaculately dressed and radiating confidence. The contrast between them and my simple black blazer and jeans wasn't lost on me. I'd never played the corporate fashion game well. Another strike against me in this new version of Solvista. "Thank you all for coming," Lucas began, his voice carrying that practiced excitement he used for big announcements. "Today marks a pivotal moment for our company." The next 45 minutes unfolded exactly as I'd expected. Lucas presented Equinox's beta launch as the crown jewel of Solvista's future, a revolutionary step that would position us as industry leaders. My name wasn't mentioned once. Marissa took over the presentation, clicking through slides of my work, explaining concepts she barely understood with rehearsed precision. I watched her animate as she described the algorithm's adaptive learning capabilities, the very feature I'd spent 6 months perfecting during late A, nights when she was nowhere to be found. As we prepare for full market launch next quarter, Lucas continued after Marissa finished, we'll be restructuring the team to optimize efficiency. His eyes finally met mine, his expression professionally neutral. "Samantha, thank you for your contributions to the early stages of this project. Your technical foundation was valuable, but as we move forward, we need leadership that aligns with our market position." The termination letter slid across the table toward me. The room went silent. "You're no longer needed on Project Equinox. Marissa will be leading from here. Also, HR will handle your offboarding. This is effective immediately." Lisa gasped audibly. Several others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I felt the collective gaze of the room, some pitying, some curious, all waiting for my reaction. In that moment, something strange happened. Instead of the anger or hurt I might have expected, I felt an almost serene clarity. All those months of preparation, of protecting myself, had led to this precise moment. I reached into my bag and retrieved the folder I'd brought with me, just in case. The official U.S. Patent Office seal gleamed under the boardroom lights as I placed it on the table and slid it toward Gerald Whitman, Solvista's legal counsel. "I believe this is relevant," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "It's the original contract for Project Equinox, filed 6 months ago, under my name." I removed the USB drive from my bag next, placing it beside the folder. "And these are the original source files. Timestamps, commit logs, and access credentials, all recorded under my personal cloud account. Everything you just watched her present is mine." The change in the room was immediate and electric. Lucas froze, his confident smile faltering. Marissa's eyes darted between the folder and Lucas, confusion replacing her triumph. Gerald opened the folder slowly, his expression shifting from skepticism to shock as he examined the contents. He looked up at the chairman, who had leaned forward with sudden interest. Is this legitimate? The chairman asked. Gerald nodded, his voice grave. Everything matches the records. This project is legally hers. The silence that followed was deafening until someone, I never saw who, whispered, "She owns everything." Lucas recovered first, his face now carefully composed though considerably paler. There must be some mistake. All work done by employees is company property. Standard contract terms. Gerald shook his head, still examining the documents. Not in this case. These filings indicate Ms. Blake registered key components through her consulting company, which was contracted separately for the core architecture. The contract includes a specific clause about intellectual property retention. I remembered the day I'd insisted on that clause, how Lucas had signed it without much thought, assuming it was just another technical detail in a sea of paperwork. He'd been too focused on impressing investors to read the fine print. "This is absurd," Marissa interjected, her voice higher than usual. "You can't just claim ownership of a company project." "I'm not claiming anything," I replied calmly. "I'm stating a legal fact. I designed Equinox, I built it, and legally, I own it." The chairman turned to Lucas, his expression thunderous. "You told me all intellectual property was secured." Lucas's response was drowned out by the sound of phones buzzing throughout the room. The news was spreading rapidly through the company. I noticed several executives exchanging panicked glances. I said, standing up, "this meeting needs to continue with legal counsel present. I'll wait for the company's official response through appropriate channels." As I gathered my things, I felt a light touch on my arm. Lisa stood beside me, her eyes wide but her stance supportive. "I'm coming with you," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. We walked out together, leaving behind a boardroom in chaos. The elevator ride down 17 floors was silent. It wasn't until we reached the lobby that Lisa finally spoke. "You've been preparing for this." I nodded. They left me no choice. What happens now? Looking out at the Denver skyline, the city where I'd poured my heart and soul into a company that had been willing to discard me, I felt not triumph, but a quiet certainty. "Now," I said, "we rebuild, but on my terms." The next 72 hours unfolded like a corporate thriller. I spent the first night in my apartment watching email notifications flood my phone. Urgent messages from Gerald Whitman, from board members, even one from the chairman himself, all requesting immediate meetings, all suddenly treating me with the respect I'd been denied for months. I responded to none of them. Instead, I called my patent attorney, Daniel Weiss, and updated him on the situation. "They'll try to fight this," he warned. "Companies like Solvista have deep pockets and entire legal teams." "But they won't win," I said, more statement than question. "No, they won't win. Your documentation is meticulous. The contract language is clear. And frankly, they're in an indefensible position ethically. No judge is going to look kindly on what they tried to do to you." By morning, the news had spread beyond Solvista. My phone rang with calls from unknown numbers, tech journalists who'd somehow gotten wind of the situation. Former colleagues reached out with messages of support and disbelief. Lisa arrived at my apartment around noon, carrying coffee and an expression of determined loyalty. "They're panicking," she reported, settling onto my couch. "Lucas has been in non-stop meetings with legal and the board. Marissa isn't even showing her face. And the investors are asking questions. Lots of questions." I sipped my coffee, watching the Denver skyline through my window. "What about the team? The developers?" "In shock, mostly. But Sam," she hesitated, "you're something of a hero now. The quiet architect who outsmarted the suits. People are talking about resigning in solidarity." I shook my head. "Tell them not to. Good people need those jobs. This isn't about bringing down Solvista." "Then what is it about?" Looking at her, this colleague who'd become a friend, who'd walked out with me when it mattered, I considered the question carefully. "It's about standing your ground. About not letting people take what's yours just because they have fancier titles or better social skills." I set down my cup. "And it's about building something that matters, the right way." By the second day, the official communications began. A carefully worded email from the board, proposing a settlement conference. A separate message from Gerald, outlining potential mutually beneficial resolutions. I agreed to meet them on the third day, but on neutral ground. The offices of Weiss & Associates, with Daniel by my side. Lucas arrived first, without Marissa, but flanked by two attorneys I didn't recognize. He looked different. Haggard. The confidence replaced by a tightly controlled anxiety. He attempted a smile when he saw me, as if we were still colleagues, perhaps even friends. Sam, he began, extending his hand. I didn't take it. Mr. Bennett, shall we begin? The meeting lasted 3 hours. Their initial offer was predictable, a substantial financial settlement in exchange for full transfer of Equinox's intellectual property back to Solvista. When I declined without hesitation, they increased the figure, adding promises of credit, of a public acknowledgement of my contributions. We'd also like to offer you reinstatement, Lucas said finally, his tone carefully modulated. Not just your old position, a promotion. Chief Technology Officer with full authority over Equinox's development and implementation. I studied him. This man I'd once admired, now reduced to damage control. And Marissa? He shifted uncomfortably. She's chosen to pursue other opportunities. Translation. She'd been sacrificed to save him. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I'll decline. Lucas leaned forward, dropping the corporate facade for the first time. Sam, be reasonable. What do you want? Name it. We can work this out. What I want, I replied, is full ownership of Project Equinox, transferred legally and completely. Solvista can license it from me under terms we'll negotiate separately. The attorneys exchanged alarmed glances. Lucas's expression hardened. That's not possible. Equinox is the future of the company. Then perhaps you shouldn't have tried to remove the person who created it. By the end of the week, faced with mounting pressure from investors and the legal reality of my position, the board overruled Lucas. Solvista agreed to my terms. Full ownership of Equinox transferred to me, with a licensing agreement that would allow them limited use of the technology in exchange for substantial ongoing payments. Lucas was placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into his management practices. The official statement cited concerns about intellectual property protocols, rather than the truth, that he'd tried to steal credit for another person's work and been caught red-handed. As I signed the final documents in Daniel's office, finalizing my ownership of the project I'd poured my soul into, I felt no triumph, no vindictive pleasure, only a quiet certainty that I'd protected what was mine. What now? Daniel asked as we wrapped up. I smiled, thinking of the plans already forming. Now I build something new, something better. 1 month after walking out of Solvista's boardroom, I signed the lease on a small office space in downtown Denver, just 3 rooms with a view of the mountains, and enough space for the beginnings of something new. The sign on the door read simply, Blake Systems. My savings covered the initial costs. Rent, basic equipment, legal fees for establishing the company. The rest would depend on Equinox and whatever came next. Lisa was the first to join me, arriving on a Monday morning with a box of her belongings and the same determined expression she'd worn when walking out of Solvista with me. You sure about this? I asked as she unpacked her monitors. It's a risk, she laughed. After watching you stare down an entire boardroom of executives, I'd say you're the safest bet in tech right now. By the end of the week, 2 more developers from Solvista had joined us, both brilliant programmers who'd been sidelined in the company's shifting culture. Our small team settled into a rhythm reminiscent of Solvista's early days, collaborative, focused, free from corporate politics. The licensing, payments from Solvista provided steady income, but I knew we needed more to truly build Blake Systems into something sustainable. Equinox had potential far beyond its original application, and I spent long nights refining the architecture, expanding its capabilities. You need to sleep sometimes, Lisa commented one evening, finding me still at my desk well past midnight. I smiled without looking, up from my screen. I'll sleep when we're funded. We need to get this in front of the right people, she said, studying the new modules I'd developed. You can't hide behind code forever, Sam. She was right, of course. The technical brilliance of Equinox meant nothing if we couldn't get it to market. And that meant doing the one thing I'd always avoided, stepping into the spotlight. The opportunity came 3 weeks later in the form of an email from Colonel James Harrison at the Department of Defense. He'd heard about the situation at Solvista and was interested in learning more about Equinox's capabilities directly from its creator. They're looking for advanced threat detection systems, I told the team during our morning meeting. If we can demonstrate Equinox's superiority, it could be a government contract, Lisa finished, eyes wide. That's stable, long-term funding. It means I need to present, I said, the familiar anxiety rising at the thought of standing before a room of officials, all judging not just my work, but me. So you'll present, Lisa said simply. You know this system better than anyone alive. Just talk about it like you do with us. The meeting was scheduled for the following week at a secure facility outside Denver. I spent days preparing, rehearsing explanations, anticipating questions, fighting against the voice in my head that had always told me I wasn't meant for this part. The public face, the spokesperson. The morning of the presentation, I stood before my bathroom mirror, hardly recognizing myself in the tailored navy suit I'd purchased for the occasion. My reflection showed a woman who looked confident, professional, someone who might actually belong at the front of the room rather than hidden behind a screen. You built this, I told my reflection. Now own it. The DoD facility was imposing, all steel and security checkpoints. Colonel Harrison met us in the lobby, his handshake firm, his assessment of me quick, but thorough. Ms. Blake, he said, leading us toward the conference room. I've reviewed your background. Impressive work. Thank you, Colonel. I'm eager to show you what Equinox can do. The conference room held 8 people, all with military or intelligence backgrounds, all with the power to change the trajectory of Blake systems with a single decision. I set up my demonstration, aware of their evaluating gazes, the skepticism that naturally met a small, unknown company pitching to the federal government. Then I began to speak. Something strange happened as I delved into Equinox's architecture. The nervousness faded, replaced by the pure, simple confidence that came from knowing my subject intimately. This wasn't about me. It was about the system I'd built, the problems it could solve, the vulnerabilities it could protect against. Questions came, technical and challenging. I answered each one directly, without hesitation. When one official raised concerns about scalability, I pulled up additional data I'd prepared, showing projections based on real-world testing. The difference, I explained, is that Equinox doesn't just respond to known threat patterns. It anticipates variations, adapts to novel approaches. In our simulations, it detected and neutralized 94% of zero-day exploits without prior exposure to similar attack vectors. Colonel Harrison leaned forward. That's significantly higher than any system we've evaluated. Yes, I said simply. It is. 2 hours later, as we packed up our equipment, Harrison approached me privately. Your reputation precedes you, Ms. Blake, both the technical brilliance and the recent corporate situation. I met his gaze steadily. I believe in protecting what matters, Colonel, whether that's national security or intellectual property. He nodded, a hint of approval in his expression. We'll be in touch soon. The call came 3 days later. The Department of Defense wanted to contract Blake Systems for a specialized implementation of Equinox, a $4.2 million initial project with potential for expansion based on performance. We celebrated that night. Our small team gathered around pizza boxes and champagne in our modest office. It wasn't just the money, though that would sustain us for years. It was the validation, proof that what we were building mattered, that it could stand on its own merits, without corporate politics or stolen credit. As we toasted our success, my phone buzzed with a notification. An email from Lucas Bennett. Everything okay? Lisa asked, noticing my expression change. I nodded, putting the phone away without responding. Just the past trying to intrude on the present? It can wait. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I finally read his message. A carefully worded congratulation on the DoD contract. News traveled fast in Denver's tech circles, followed by an invitation to meet and clear the air. I deleted it without responding. Some bridges weren't meant to be rebuilt. The next morning, as I walked into our office, my company, my team, my future, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. Not the triumph of revenge, but the quiet satisfaction of having stood my ground and found solid footing on the other side. Blake Systems wasn't just a response to betrayal. It was becoming something more. A company built on respect, on recognition of contribution, on the simple principle that brilliant work deserved its due credit, regardless of who created it. And as I looked at the small team gathered around our conference table, already diving into the day's challenges with enthusiasm and purpose, I knew we were just beginning. 3 months into our DoD contract, Blake Systems had grown to 11 employees. We'd expanded to the adjacent office space, installed proper security systems, and begun to establish ourselves as a legitimate contender in the cybersecurity field. The DoD work exceeded expectations, with Colonel Harrison already discussing expanded applications for Equinox. Meanwhile, Solvista was struggling. Without full access to Equinox's core architecture, they'd been unable to deliver on promises made to investors. Their stock had dropped 17% in the last quarter, and industry blogs were full of speculation about the company's future. I tried not to follow the news too closely. My focus remained on Blake. Systems, on building something that reflected my values rather than dwelling on the past. But Denver's tech community was small and information flowed freely. Lucas is being pushed out, Lisa told me one morning, reading from her phone as I refilled my coffee. Board vote yesterday. They're bringing in someone from Oracle to replace him. I absorbed this without comment, surprised by my lack of satisfaction at the news. There had been a time when I'd imagined this moment would feel like vindication. Instead, it simply felt like the natural conclusion to a story I was no longer part of. Later that afternoon, my assistant, Miguel, knocked on my office door. "There's someone here to see you," he said, his expression carefully neutral. Marissa Lee. The name hit me like a physical force. Of all the people from Solvista, she was the last I expected, or wanted, to face. What does she want? She wouldn't say, just that it's important. I considered refusing the meeting. There was nothing Marissa could offer that interested me. No conversation I felt compelled to have with the woman who'd been willing to take credit for my work. Yet curiosity won out. "Send her in." Marissa entered my office with none of the confidence she'd exuded at Solvista. Her designer suit was as impeccable as ever, but her expression was strained, uncertain. "Thank you for seeing me," she began, remaining standing even when I gestured toward a chair. "What can I do for you, Marissa?" She took a deep breath. "I'm here to apologize." Of all the things I'd expected, this wasn't it. I studied her carefully, looking for the calculation behind the words. "For what, specifically?" "For taking credit for your work. For allowing myself to be used as a tool to push you out." She finally sat down, perched on the edge of the chair. "It was wrong. I knew it was wrong. And I did it anyway." I leaned back, processing her words. "Why now?" "It's been months. Because I'm leaving Denver. I've accepted a position. In Boston." She paused. "And because I need to be able to live with myself." The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken accusations and defenses. "Did Lucas put you up to it?" I finally asked. "The presentation? Taking credit for Equinox?" She nodded slowly. "He said you were brilliant, but not leadership material. That investors and clients needed someone more relatable. He convinced me it was just business, not personal." The familiar words echoed in my mind. Just business. The universal excuse for ethical failures. "I believed him," she continued. "I told myself it was a necessary step for the company's growth, that you'd be compensated well, just behind the scenes. As the genius behind the curtain." I quoted her earlier words back to her. She flinched. "Yes, I was wrong. I know that doesn't change anything, but I wanted you to hear it directly from me." I studied her, this woman who'd been willing to claim my work as her own. In her face, I saw something I hadn't expected. Genuine regret, yes, but also fear. The fear of someone who'd compromised their principles and was trying to find their way back. "What happened after I left?" I asked. "Chaos," she replied simply. "The board launched an investigation. Lucas tried to blame me entirely, said I'd misled him about the intellectual property situation." A bitter smile crossed her face. "I resigned before they could fire me. Lucas held on longer, but yesterday's vote was unanimous." I nodded, processing this information without comment. "The company's struggling," she added. "Without full access to Equinox, they can't deliver what was promised. And without Lucas's charm or your innovation," she left the sentence unfinished. "That's not my problem anymore." "No, it's not." She straightened her shoulders. "I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did. And I'm sorry for it. You deserved better." As she stood to leave, I found myself asking the question that had lingered in my mind for months. "Why did you go along with it? You're clearly intelligent. You must have known it would eventually fall apart." She paused at the door, considering the question. Ambition, insecurity, the intoxicating feeling of being the chosen one. She met my gaze directly. "And because it's easier to believe you deserve something that isn't yours when someone in authority tells you that you do." After she left, I stood at my office window, looking out at Denver's skyline. The city where I'd been betrayed and where I'd found redemption of a sort. The confrontation with Marissa had stirred emotions I'd thought were settled. Not anger, but a complex mix of vindication and an unexpected empathy. She'd been a willing participant in my erasure, yes, but she'd also been a tool in Lucas's hands. A woman used to advance his agenda, just as I had been. The difference was that I'd refused to be erased. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Defense team meeting in 5. You ready?" I texted back a quick affirmative, putting thoughts of Solvista, Lucas, and Marissa aside. Their story was ending. Mine was still being written. The Denver Tech Summit was the last place I expected to find myself. 1 year after founding Blake Systems, public speaking had never been my strength. Yet here I was, preparing to deliver a keynote address to over 500 industry professionals. The invitation had come after our success with the Department of Defense project. Equinox had exceeded all performance metrics, leading to an expanded contract and growing recognition within cybersecurity circles. Colonel Harrison had personally recommended me as a speaker. The industry needs to hear from the actual innovators, he'd said, not just the marketers. I stood backstage, reviewing my notes one last time as the summit director made my introduction. Lisa waited nearby, offering silent support. "You've got this," she whispered. "Just talk about the work. The rest will follow." The applause as I took the stage was polite but reserved. Many in the audience still didn't know who I was or why I was there. I adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath, and began. "Cybersecurity isn't about defending against what we know," I started. "It's about anticipating what we don't know yet, about seeing patterns in the noise before they become threats." For the next 40 minutes, I walked through the philosophy behind Equinox. Not the technical specifications, but the fundamental approach that made it revolutionary. I spoke about adaptive systems, about the balance between human insight and machine learning, about building security that evolved alongside threats rather than merely responding to them. As I spoke, I noticed the energy in the room shifting. People leaned forward. Questions during the interactive portions became more engaged, more thoughtful. These were my people, engineers, developers, architects, who cared about the how and why, not just the bottom line. The future of cybersecurity isn't in faster responses, I concluded. It's in true anticipation, and that requires us to think differently about how we build our systems from the ground up. The applause that followed wasn't just polite, it was enthusiastic. As I stepped away from the podium, the summit director announced a brief break before my Q&A session, and I found myself surrounded by attendees eager to continue the conversation. Among them was a face I recognized immediately, Caroline Reeves, CTO of Meridian Technologies, one of the largest cybersecurity firms in the country. She'd been something of a role model for me, a woman who'd broken through barriers in a male-dominated field through sheer technical brilliance. "Samantha Blake," she said, extending her hand. "I've been following your work since the Solvista situation. Impressive doesn't begin to cover it." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely flattered. "Your paper on predictive threat modeling was actually a significant influence on Equinox's design," she smiled. "I'd love to hear more about that. Are you free for dinner later? I have a proposition that might interest you." That dinner changed the trajectory of Blake Systems. Caroline wasn't just interested in Equinox, she was interested in a partnership. Meridian had the infrastructure and client base that would allow Equinox to scale globally, while Blake Systems had the innovative approach that could keep Meridian ahead of their competitors. "Not an acquisition," she clarified as we discussed terms. "A true partnership. Your team remains independent with full credit and control over your technology. We provide the platform and resources to deploy it worldwide." It was everything I'd hoped for but hadn't dared expect. Recognition of our work without erasure. Expansion without compromise. 2 days later, as I presented the partnership opportunity to my team, I noticed a familiar figure hovering near the entrance to our office. Lucas Bennett stood awkwardly in the doorway, looking both out of place and desperate to be anywhere else. After the meeting concluded, I approached him cautiously. "Lucas, this is unexpected." He'd aged in the year since I'd last seen him, lines around his eyes deeper, his posture less confident. "I saw your keynote," he said. "You were remarkable up there." I waited, unsure of his purpose in coming. "I owe you an apology," he continued, the words clearly difficult for him. "What I did, trying to push you aside, giving Marissa credit for your work, it was wrong, professionally and personally." "Yes," I agreed simply. "It was." He nodded, accepting the lack of absolution. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I recognize what I did, and I've been paying for it." The rumor mill had kept me informed. Lucas hadn't found another executive position after leaving Solvista. His reputation had been too damaged by the intellectual property scandal and the company's subsequent struggles. "What are you doing now?" I asked, not out of malice, but genuine curiosity. "Consulting," he replied with a self-deprecating smile. "Advising startups on how to avoid the mistakes I made. There's a surprising market for what not to do expertise." Despite everything, I found myself appreciating the irony. There's value in learning from failure. There is. He hesitated. I heard about the Meridian partnership. Congratulations. That's huge. Thank you. An awkward silence fell between us. This man who had once been my mentor, then my betrayer, now standing before me as neither. I should go, he said finally. I just wanted to say that in person. And to tell you that what you've built here, he gestured at the Blake Systems office. It's what Solvista could have been if I'd been smart enough to value the right things. As he turned to leave, I found myself saying, Lucas. He paused, looking back. Good luck with the consulting. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was acknowledgement of his humanity, of the complexity that exists in all of us, of the possibility that people can recognize their mistakes and perhaps eventually find a way to make amends. Later that evening, as I finalized the partnership agreement with Meridian, I realized that my journey had never really been about revenge or even vindication. It had been about claiming my space, about refusing to be erased and insisting on recognition for what I'd built. The contract with Meridian included one clause I'd insisted on personally. All implementations of Equinox would carry the designation Blake Architecture in their documentation, a permanent record of its creator that could never be removed or replaced. Not fame, not fortune, just the simple, powerful truth of authorship. As I signed my name, I thought of all the women throughout history whose contributions had been erased, whose innovations had been credited to others, whose brilliance had been hidden behind more acceptable faces. This signature was for them, too. 5 years after that fateful boardroom confrontation, I stood on the stage at MIT's commencement ceremony, preparing to address the graduating class as their invited speaker. The Meridian partnership had expanded Blake Systems beyond anything I could have imagined, with Equinox now protecting critical infrastructure in 27 countries. More importantly, we'd remained true to our founding principles: recognition of contribution, integrity in our work, and a steadfast refusal to let politics override innovation. Looking out at the sea of graduates, particularly the women in STEM fields who'd specifically requested to meet with me afterward, I felt a profound sense of responsibility. My story had somehow become larger than myself, a cautionary tale and an inspiration that had found its way into business ethics courses and women's leadership seminars. The greatest innovations, I began, often come from those who see what others miss. The quiet voices in the room may be the ones with the most revolutionary ideas. But brilliance alone isn't enough in our world. I paused, making eye contact with faces throughout the audience. You also need courage. The courage to protect what you create. The courage to stand up when others try to diminish your contribution. And sometimes the courage to walk away and build something better. I shared my journey, not the sanitized version that had appeared in business magazines, but the real story, with all its pain and uncertainty. I talked about the nights I doubted myself, the fear that had almost kept me from filing those crucial patents, the temptation to simply accept erasure as the price of participation. The hardest lesson I learned wasn't technical. It was that in a world that often confuses confidence with competence, you have to be your own strongest advocate. No one else will value your contribution if you don't value it first. After the ceremony, during the reception, a young woman approached me with determined eyes behind stylish glasses. Dr. Blake, she began, your story changed my approach to my research. I started documenting everything, insisting on proper attribution. My advisor called me difficult. She smiled. I took it as a compliment. Throughout the evening, similar conversations followed, students and faculty sharing how they'd been inspired to protect their work, to insist on recognition, to build environments where contribution was valued regardless of who it came from. As the reception wound down, I checked my phone to find an email from Lisa, now Blake Systems Chief Operating Officer. The subject line read simply, "You won't believe who just applied for a job." The message contained a resume attachment, the name at the E. Top, Marissa Lee. I smiled at the universe's sense of irony. After her move to Boston, Marissa had rebuilt her career in product management, working her way up through increasingly responsible positions. Her application was for our new East Coast division, a role that would put her considerable skills to use without any overlap with my direct responsibilities. After a moment's reflection, I forwarded the resume to our HR director with a note. Worth interviewing. People deserve second chances when they've learned from their mistakes. It wasn't about forgiveness so much as recognition that growth was possible. that the person who had once been willing to take credit for another's work might have become someone who understood the value of genuine contribution. The following morning, before flying back to Denver, I visited the MIT Museum's exhibition on women in technology, a chronicle of overlooked innovators whose contributions had shaped our digital world, often without recognition. A small plaque near the entrance caught my eye. Behind every innovation is a human story. Behind every human story is the struggle to be seen, heard, and acknowledged. This exhibition honors those whose names were nearly lost to history and reminds us that recognition is not merely a matter of ego, but of truth. I stood there for a long moment, thinking of how close I'd come to becoming another erased woman, another brilliant mind relegated to a footnote while others claimed the spotlight. Back at Blake Systems headquarters the following week, I gathered our now 40-person team for an important announcement. After months of development, we were ready to launch our newest innovation, a decentralized security framework that built on Equinox's foundation, but pushed its capabilities into new territory. Project Dawn, I explained, represents not just technological evolution, but a philosophical one. Every module, every component will carry the name of its primary architect. No contribution will be uncredited, no innovation orphaned. I noticed several team members exchange meaningful glances. This wasn't just policy, it was protection. A promise that what had happened to me wouldn't happen to them. Later, alone in my office with the Denver sunset painting the mountains in gold and purple, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal that had nearly broken me had instead become the catalyst for something stronger, something better. Not just a successful company, but a model for how things could be different. Lisa appeared in my doorway, interrupting my thoughts. Ready for the Defense Department call? They're eager to hear about Dawn's capabilities. I nodded, gathering my notes. Always ready. As we walked to the conference room, she glanced at me with a knowing smile. Did you ever imagine, that day in the Sol Vista boardroom, that we'd end up here? I considered the question seriously. Not specifically here, but I knew I wouldn't be erased. That much I was certain of, because that had been the real victory. Not the company's success, not the partnerships or contracts, not even the vindication of seeing Lucas and Marissa face consequences. The true triumph had been in refusing to disappear, in standing firm when everything and everyone pushed me to step aside. If my legacy was nothing more than that, the example of a woman who refused to be erased, it would be enough. But Blake Systems had become so much more, a place where innovation was honored regardless of its source, where contribution mattered more than charisma, where the quiet voices had just as much power as the loud ones. That evening, as I prepared for the call with Colonel Harrison, now General Harrison, I paused to look at the framed patent certificate on my wall, the one that had changed everything that day in the boardroom. It wasn't just a legal document. It was a declaration that what I built mattered, that my mind mattered, that I would not be relegated to the shadows while others claimed the light. In the end, they had tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed. And from that seed, something stronger, more resilient, and ultimately more powerful had grown. Not just a company, but a commitment to ensuring that brilliance, whatever form it took and whoever possessed it, would always be recognized, valued, and credited. That was the true patent, the one that could never be revoked.